China's military is rising, but the US might just be taking aim at the CCP's greatest weakness. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell, and I have some exciting news. I've been making a push to get to 2 million subscribers, and over the past few weeks, there's already been over 10,000 new subscribers. Just a bit more to go. So if you're watching and you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button now. When we get to 2 million, we'll do a special live stream for you, where we'll do something we've never done before. So again, hit that subscribe button. And now, on with the show. The United States has a huge problem, and that problem is China. For years, China has been laser focused on expanding its military, improving its technology generally through the theft of intellectual property, and undercutting the world economy. China represents a huge threat to the US, both economically and militarily. And it couldn't have gotten to where it is today without help from big financial investors, including the United States. State governments and universities have invested billions of dollars in China. This is according to a report by Future Union, a pro-democracy trade advocacy group. According to the report, over the past 3 years, U.S. public pensions have invested more than $68 billion in China. Disturbingly, 42 states have at least one public pension that has made private equity or venture capital investments in China or Hong Kong at some point in the past. And 17 states have at least one public pension with at least 2% of its assets under management in China-based private companies or private investment funds. Not good. Future Union has shared this data with the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, which is calling for an end to these investments after learning that the CCP's military and surveillance capabilities have been boosted by these funds. The House Select Committee also published its own report, which said that at least 2/3 of the investments from venture capital firms, which is around $1.9 billion, went to artificial intelligence companies whose technology is contributing to China's military buildup and human rights abuses. It's like a slug buying a salt mine. Two of the biggest fund investors in China are the New York State Common Retirement Fund and the California Public Employees Retirement System. The New York State Retirement Fund serves 1.2 million public employees and was identified as the largest investor in Hong Kong and China. It committed a total of $8.3 billion to the region, including $3.5 billion, or 42% of the total, in the 3 years before the report came out. Meanwhile, the California Public Employees Retirement System, which describes itself as America's largest public pension fund, came in second place, with more than $1.8 billion invested into China in the last 3 years, and $7.8 billion in total investments to China and Hong Kong over the years. It's fitting that these are retirement and pension funds, because me constantly warning against investing in China is getting really, really old. And then there are the university endowments that have invested in China. There are a lot. Predictably, none of these schools decided to comment on the allegations. Ironic how all these progressive universities are funding human rights abuses in China. This is causing all sorts of issues. For example, the U.S. pension funds heavily invested in China complicate Washington's crackdown on China, particularly its military buildup and technological advancements. Meanwhile, there's another problem. U.S. investment in TikTok and its parent company, ByteDance. According to another Future Union report, $9 billion from U.S. pensions, university endowments, and other institutional investors may have had exposure to TikTok's Chinese parent company, ByteDance. In particular, according to publicly available data, 39 of the largest U.S. public pensions have invested in funds with exposure to ByteDance between 2012 and 2024. Some of the biggest public pension groups involved in this investing in ByteDance were, you guessed it, the New York State Common Retirement Fund and CalPERS, both of which denied the findings. Meanwhile, the University of Michigan, the University of California system, and even Princeton University were other major endowments with significant investment in funds that have placed bets on ByteDance. We are literally funding the weapons the CCP is using to destroy us. So many are struggling economically in the US, and we're sending money from hardworking, ordinary people and retirees to fund a country that openly threatens the US. That's to say nothing of China's human rights abuses against ethno-religious minorities and other Chinese citizens, or the fact that Beijing often steals and uses US intellectual property to make similar products, then undercut market prices with these knockoffs. So some government officials are speaking out, like GOP Florida Senator Marco Rubio.
So if we're serious about this, we need to cut this off. This is not a ban on Chinese investment. This is a ban on the thrift savings plan and its money, your money, the investment money of federal employees being used to invest in companies that our own government has placed on lists for human rights violations and posing a threat to the national security of the country.
Yes, things are so crazy that a Florida man is the only one making any sense right now. He's not alone. Washington is working on measures that would make this much harder to do. But in a chaotic election year, it's unclear if any such measures will make it through the Senate before 2025. State governments, too, are taking action. 5 states, Indiana, Florida, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Kansas, have directed state fund administrators to begin the divestment process over the past year, with several more either considering doing the same or making preparations to do so. Missouri was among the first states to take such action. Its treasurer, Vivek Malik, pushed his state's main retirement system to pull its investments from Chinese companies. Malik is seeking re-election on August 6 against other candidates skeptical of China and has been focused on this issue for some time. In some of his campaign ads, he has vowed that as long as I'm treasurer, they won't get money from us, not one penny. Spoken like someone who watches this channel. Respect. Last November, Malik tried and failed to get fellow trustees of the Missouri State Employees Retirement System to divest from Chinese companies. But a month later, he won approval for a plan requiring divestment from Beijing over a 12-month period. Meanwhile, Chris Garton, an Indiana senator, said this is a great issue for folks to put politics aside, circle the wagons, and say we're going to stand against the Chinese Communist Party and all the threats they pose to our nation. Many of the states divesting lean Republican, but this does reflect the growing bipartisan idea in the US that investing in China is a bad policy. Part of this is, of course, because China's economy is failing and they're making less money. But the other reason is the failed perception from previous decades that China would become less authoritarian as it grew wealthier. That just didn't happen. There's growing outrage in the US over the CCP's aggression towards Washington and its allies, as well as its myriad of human rights abuses and unfair economic practices. And these states aren't alone. The Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board, the US government's main pension fund, announced back in November that it too would stop investing in Hong Kong and China-listed stocks due to worsening CCP-US relations. This isn't happening without a fight, however. Stephen Roach, an economist and former chair of Morgan Stanley Asia, said some U.S. state pension fund managers risk missing a potential bounce back if they let asset allocation be clouded by America's pervasive anti-China sentiment. I'm sure that Roach's position as a research fellow at Yale University, which invested $50 million in Chinese companies, has nothing to do with that viewpoint. Nope, nothing at all. These divestment initiatives are only the latest in a series of state-led moves to target Beijing, including bans on land sales to Chinese entities and legislation requiring state-level stress tests to assess the local impact of war across the Taiwan Strait. After the Russian invasion of Ukraine, many state governments and voters are becoming more conscious about investing in non-democratic countries, especially with the regular CCP threats against Taiwan. Now, China hates it when we point out where their funding comes from. For that matter, so do U.S. investors who make money betting on China. That's why China Uncensored doesn't get any big investors. Just funding the show is hard. That's why I need your help. Join what I call the China Uncensored 50-cent army on patreon.com/China Uncensored. All it takes is the price of a cup of coffee. Cheap coffee, not the Civic Cat stuff. And as a thank you, I'll answer your questions at the end of these episodes. Today's comes from KV Ret Laria. Hey Chris, longtime viewer and supporter of the show. Been watching since you had 50,000 subs. Whoa, that's like 10 years ago. Thank you for watching. In your opinion, what should ASEAN do in order to counter China, seeing as how other ASEAN members seem to be rooting or allying themselves to China? That's a great question. So ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is a 10-nation bloc. Potentially as a group, they could have a lot of power to combat the Chinese Communist Party's interests. China doesn't like that, which is why at a 2010 ASEAN meeting, Chinese Foreign Minister Yang Jiechi said, "China is a big country and you are small countries," and that is a fact. It was meant to intimidate. China's been trying to make bilateral connections with each of these countries individually, to break apart the bloc, if not in name, by getting the individual members dependent on China, so collectively they can't fight against them. So what would make ASEAN more potent would be for these countries to come to the same realization as these US pension funds. The CCP is a threat. Do not invest. Just like Europe found itself at a loss when Russia invaded Ukraine and they were all deeply dependent on Russian energy. Being tied to authoritarian regimes hurts you. It doesn't change the authoritarian for the better. Thanks for your question and all these years of support. Again, like I said, China Uncensored isn't getting any big investments, and YouTube is starving us of cash. Despite that, China Uncensored is having a real impact. The CCP is scared of us. That's why Chinese state-run media even called China Uncensored disgraceful anti-China garbage. So join me on Patreon by clicking that orange button or go to patreon.com/China Uncensored. Your support really angers the CCP. And thank you so much. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.